Okay, I believe I'm live. I was reading this little thing on this. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to turn this way. Upper orientation is locked. Reverse it back. Okay, so it doesn't allow me to do the widescreen, unfortunately. So what I'm doing is, hi, my name is Missy. I am discussing the reliability of the test that is used to determine whether or not EDTA was present in planted blood. The documentary of Making a Murderer discussed that test. The trial had that test used. Hey, cut it out. Melody, come here, baby. She's like got vision problems, and so she stands there, and the dog gets mad because she's staring at her, but really she's not staring at her. She just can't see. Anyways, so I got to thinking about this specific test. I found it very impressive that when I learned that the lawyer for Stephen Avery bought the car that was owned previously by Teresa Halbach. I found that very interesting that she was able to buy it. Um, I don't know why the family, I don't know. But, anyways, she got the car. Okay, so she has the car and she does these different experiments with the blood spatter, which I didn't see that it looked appropriate. The blood spatters didn't look proper at all. They didn't have the throws pattern to them. All they had was like contact, and a couple of them had like the flow pattern. No, anyway, so she did some experiments with, the flow pattern, but one thing that was not done was the test on whether or not EDTA was present. They weren't allowed to do an independent testing of this particular test, and I wanted to know why. Why did they not do their own independent test at that time? And they did have somebody testify that it was not a conclusive test, even though basically those who did the test concluded that it was with 100% accuracy. I do believe that that's perjured testimony. I'm going to go into the detail on one, how our testing approved for use, and two, details about this particular testing and who developed this test and who has control of this test. So, the FBI is the one who developed that test. The FBI developed it. During the O.J. Simpson trial, there was accusations that if you remember that, that there was blood planting. And one of the examples was a sock that had blood, same exact position on each side of the sock, that looked like somebody just literally dropped some blood on top of it and it just flowed right through, like it wasn't on his body. Anyways, it didn't add up. So they did a test that they asked the FBI to develop the test so that they could determine whether or not EDTA was present, which would mean that would support that it was planted. And interestingly, in that case, the prosecution, even though that was negative, elected not to use that particular. They didn't want to use it, and I think it was probably so. Here's the discussion. This is by Rockne Harmon. He's an Alameda County DA, retired, and he discusses the O.J. Simpson and Stevie Avery, which was the only two cases that this particular type of testing was ever used. So it says that the prosecution elected not to use it. And it was interesting that the defense did use it. And I don't know how they were able to use it to support planting when there was a negative, unless they showed that I don't know. I'm not going to go back into all that. But the interesting thing is I found some articles. Now here's the thing. There's absolutely zero, zilch, nada peer review on this particular test. So some scientists, some medical scientists who should be the ones to be determining. So I wanted to show you the FDA. That's the first. Okay. The FDA is the law on determining if a particular blood test is something that can be used. So the FBI developing their own test and having sole control of the testing of that is very problematic, right? I'm going to get rid of some of these here. I'm going to show you commercial laboratory tests and the FDA approval. So very clearly, I'm going to try to get everything on the screen with my narrow phone view. Okay. So it is our government, not the FBI, who controls whether or not a test can be used. So they develop a test, there's no peer review, and interestingly is what I found in articles by scientists. Okay, so here's the National Library of Medicine, the National Center for Biotechnology Information. This is a medical organization, and this is basically their comments. So if there's any peer review at all that exists on this test that they used to seal his fate, it would be here. This is the closest thing that can be found on the reliability of this particular use of this test. This is dated October 20th, 2016. So if anything, this article by a medical organization could be used, in my opinion, for new evidence. Because what it says is basically that there could be false positives on this test, and there are some things that was discussed by the FBI about the reliability of their test. So this goes in, and I'll put the links when I'm done with this video. The LCMS, I'm not going to go into all these details, but if you are somebody who is interested specifically in the process of this test, okay, this is your article. And it does state, let's say, for example, the EDTA was found to be present. And then they decide, oh, okay, so these police did plant evidence and we are hereby, we're going to prosecute. And they figure out who was the one that actually planted it and they prosecute them. Because this article says that there can be a false positive, it should be inadmissible against them. So there's not even really at this point in time an ability to prosecute these people if at some point they do another test and decide EDTA was in it. And what I found was interesting about his current lawyer, I didn't understand, and maybe I missed it, maybe she did actually do it. If I was the person who got possession of that car, the very first thing I would have done was an independent test of EDTA to say, well, maybe, I mean, you got accusations against authority that they're, setting this guy up or whatever, okay? And the blood spatters don't match at all. So it does still look suspicious, and I have a big problem, with the FBI being one developing. So I wondered, why did she not get the EDTA independently tested? Now that she has her hands on the case, she has possession of the car, why would she not have this test done? And that's when I think the problem is that this test is done and developed by the FBI, and they've already concluded that it wasn't in there. So unless you have another lab who's doing this test to independently test this, then the reason they can't is because it's not a test that's been FDA approved. Okay, so this is a test solely developed by the FBI. So it tells you in this article that false positives can happen. So it's not a reliable test. Now, as far as negatives, it does go into, there are some weak points. So it is not 100% accuracy. Therefore, this is not a reliable test. Just like lie detector tests, although they have great accuracy, they are not 100%. Okay, so they are not admissible, and neither should this test be admissible at this point in time, because it does go into some details of how and why there are weak spots in determining the negative results of this test. So I think people who are arguing about these documentaries, I'm disgusted to see that they're focusing on this new documentary more on his, his behaviors, his past, many of which was already present in, you know, when he was convicted of a crime he didn't commit the first time. A lot of those stuff in his, earlier youth or whatever, in his relationships, all that was already present. Okay. So it should be all about the evidence. That should be the focus. That should be whether or not his case should be overturned. And I don't know if she has used this article, but this is definitely new evidence that that test that was used, that DNA, to say that there was no EDTA, which basically said that that blood in the car was his. That sealed his fate. If anything did, that did. Okay. But the fact that they withheld a witness who saw Bobby Dassey, who had connection to those burn barrels, had connection to the property, pushing that car. Okay. And so this test, I think the accusation against these officers are appropriate to make because the blood spatters don't match up at all. They just don't match up. But I would definitely say, in my opinion, her ex-boyfriend did not kill. That just remove him from the suspect list. There are two people besides Steve Avery that is very, very plausible that committed the murder. And one is Bobby Dassey, who a witness said they saw him push that vehicle. And he had access to the property, and he could have easily been out there burning. And then there's the second person who wrote a 7-page letter, who's the very person who testified that Avery confessed to him. That same person wrote a very long, detailed letter that he was basically put up to testifying against Avery by the prosecution, and he accuses the prosecution of setting him up to that, and he confessed. Unfortunately, he confessed he's trying to extort money. He's trying to get the reward money to give his confession. But what I saw, there was only 4 pages available out of 7. But what I saw in the letter is that I did not detect any obviously available signs of deception. And what they should do is they should take that letter, they should take it to a handwriting analysis who is certified, who has testified in courts of law, and testify that there's no deception in his letter, that he actually gave a true confession, and used that as new evidence along with this right here, that test is faulty. That test, and also I think is very important for all of the cases across the United States of America, we need to strip from the FBI the ability to develop tests with no peer review, no approval process to use in court cases to take somebody's life from them, either by life in prison or death penalty. We must immediately petition to our government that no test that can be used against people like this without peer review or government approval should be used. And also new evidence that that person who testified that results from that testing was 100%. This medical review right here is saying that it is not 100% accuracy. There can not only be false positives, okay, to protect those who's planting evidence, it could also, there's weak spots in it as well. It is not a 100% accuracy test, and it is not a peer reviewed test, and it's not approved for no FBI should be allowed to create tests like that. So that's what I'm stating here. And they're talking about here about the accuracy of the EDTA test. So I did some research on that, and basically I conclude we have a serious problem, not just for the Avery test, because they have now only used this test in 2 particular cases that I'm aware of, but we must stop the use of this test in court cases until and unless it is perfected to the point where there are not false positives, and to the point where you can truly 100% say with scientific certainty that the accuracy is there. And so we cannot give the FBI the power to develop tests used to take people's freedom and their lives. But I do also want to mention that, you know, the sealed vial, I did find some information on that. There is a statement that this was an old vial of blood from his first trial where he was convicted and then cleared. That vial of blood that they're saying was tampered with was the vial of blood that they used to test his blood to clear him. Okay. And the nurse is now deceased. She's the one that collected the blood. That's how the hole in the top of the vial got there. And there's no mention of that. But the fact that she's deceased and cannot further comment on it, and they're saying, however, that a defense team is the one that opened it to get that comparison purposes. But what I have a problem with is, where is that team saying, okay, this is true or this is not true? No, we did not do this. This was not done. This is, you know what I'm saying? Where is the confirmation from the lawyers to say that this is true or not true? So at any rate, the evidence of the blood pattern in the vehicle is very problematic. I don't believe they had blood spatter experts on his trial. And the only way, however, that could be argued for a new trial is if you argue the attorney was not competent, because that is obviously, you know, something that's been done. If it wasn't some kind of scientific thing that was available then that would have to definitely fall under incompetent attorneys, because the judges will just rule, well, that was available then, you could have argued it then, this is not new evidence. But this is new evidence. This right here is new evidence. So then you have, here are the reports from the FBI. Okay, this is the ones that the article stated that there was some reports from the FBI about the particular method of doing the test of EDTA. And I will put the links in the description of this video once I'm done being live. And this is talking about how they do their test. Scientific process made via the cumulative effort. However, again, this is not a approved of that I'm aware of. It's not an approved test. It was developed solely by the FBI with no peer review. And it was only used twice. So it is something that should not have been used or admissible. And for a judge to make the determination that he's going to allow to be admissible a test that's not even under peer reviews, not been approved by the FDA, that's very problematic. That is very problematic. The FDA classification and requirements for approval under the 1976 Medical Device Amendments that established the FDA's regulation of medical device and tests, manufacturers are required to notify the agency of their intent to market a device. So this just goes into the process. But this also goes into laboratory tests and the approval process for it to be used by labs. So I don't believe at this time, but I could be wrong, that the attorney currently for Stephen Avery can go and independently have this test done by a separate lab than what the FBI used, because there are no labs that can do this test, because it is not FDA approved and therefore should not be a reliable test. This was March 4, 2021 article. And again, you're more than welcome to look in the description. All these links are in there, but I just wanted to make some clarification about the EDTA testing, because the direct evidence is what people should be focused on. People get caught up in all the emotions of these documentaries on behaviors and so forth, and that's egregious. That's egregious. Direct evidence is what should be focused upon. And so, one, is the EDTA testing that was used to seal his fate in that trial, is that a test that should not, or been admissible? And is it reliable? And two, the blood spattering, okay, that, if you go back and revisit that, it is very problematic. Very problematic. It doesn't add up at all. I personally believe that the fragments found in those barrels, but then there's another writing about the fact that there was remains in 3 different locations. And that's very bizarre. But the confession is another new evidence. If they were to get that confession of that person who testified against Stephen Avery, saying that he confessed, which of course, that's not even believable, but if, unfortunately the jury believed it. If that person would get these confession letter and analyzed by a handwriting expert who is certified to testify as an expert witness in trials, it would at the very least be persuasive evidence, arguing new evidence, along with the fact that this lab has been now determined by a medical organization that can have false results. That's important. That test should never. And we also need to, they could argue that it's unconstitutional to use a test that has not been gone through any peer review, has not been approved, and cannot be independently tested for the defense in an independent lab. But the only person who has this test currently that I know of is the FBI. That is unconstitutional, violation of due process. And to use tests that now have been stated have unreliable results after they testified in court, there's 100% accuracy and certainty. Yeah, he should have a new trial based on the evidence that is very problematic. And that's all I have to say about this one. And I hope that you have a blessed day. How do I end this? I'm trying to end this. You want to stop streaming? Yes.